2021, like all sessions, was its own animal, but incredibly busy due to the fact that the 2020 session was cut short due to COVID. So as Shannon said, I've got a lot in this presentation. I promised to send her the full presentation so you can have the background. And those of you who know me, I talk fast because lobbyists don't count their steps, they count their words. So I got to get my word count in today. But please feel free to interrupt. This is a great group, good size to just ask those questions. And let's take care of them when you have them. So we'll get started. So what did the 2021 session really look like? We had gone through an election, and so we had some changes of new members, and we weren't sure going into those elections what things would look like. But it turned out that we were more conservative than we were prior in 2019. And so we knew that both the House and Senate were going to have supermajorities, which means if the governor was to override a bill, they had enough votes if they pulled all the Republicans together to override the governor. You can see on this slide, we had some newbies. The makeup in the Senate didn't change by count, but it did change by the members and who came. We had new leadership in the Senate. Ty Masterson and Rick Wilburn were the Senate president and vice president, and then Gene Suellentrop, when we started the session, was the majority leader. He had some issues that occurred in his life during the session, which required him to step down. He actually refused to step down, so he was voted out of office by his peers, and they hired Larry Alley to come in. It was actually during the last day of the session, the sine die, but Larry was filling in throughout the second half of the session due to Gene's legal problems that he had. We also had the first Senate Democrat minority leader, Dinah Sykes, out of Kansas City, out of Lenexa. Brought a new fresh face to that office. It had been Tony Hensley for a long time, who was from Topeka, but had served longer than I've been lobbying. And so it was fun to have Dinah come in. She had a great relationship with her Republican peers. Obviously, they don't agree on very much, but they did have a good working relationship. The House leadership, though we went through an election, did not change. Speaker Reichman, who is our Olathe hometown boy, served an unprecedented third term. And so that was unique, but it brought that stability to that caucus in the House through a difficult time. And then the majority leader stayed the same and the minority leader. I think what was unique is Governor Kelly did not slow down on her desire to veto legislation that came to her that she thought was not something she wanted to see go forward in the state. She vetoed over 21 bills and line items within the budget. And some of the key vetoes that stuck where the legislature did not have enough votes to override her vetoes. The business COVID response bill that was set up to help businesses that were forced down. They wanted to take some of this COVID relief funds that were coming in. The E-Verify was in the budget bill. There was a short-term health policy bill that would have allowed short-term policies to be renewed from 2 years to 3 years. Don't Tread on Me, which is a license plate, was kind of controversial. Some see it as being racist. Others felt like it was just an American pride license plate having to do with the flag, the original flag. And then there was the civics test and the financial literacy test that you would have to pass those exams before you got your diploma. And then there was a gun education bill that had passed but was vetoed, which would have required the State Board of Education to put together educational materials for grade school kids on gun safety. So, but the big piece out of all of that was the governor was not afraid to veto bills. And so that really set the tone. I think legislators were willing to move forward with those controversial issues, but it forced them back to have to go and negotiate if she vetoed the bill to make sure that they had either had the 2/3 vote or to run a new bill that the governor wasn't going to veto. There was some of those, they called it her veto palooza override. And so this was also the veto override palooza. And so the Senate president deemed that there were several bills that they were going to buck the governor on. These were the ones where they were successful. The most important was Senate Bill 50 to the business community. This is the tax bill that had been tried 3 times and had been vetoed. The first year it didn't pass under Governor Collier, and then the governor had vetoed it the last 2 years. The perimeters were the same, just the details changed a bit. But there were a lot of pieces in there that were important for the business community. And we'll talk about more provisions on that. But carry concealed, that was overridden. So now 18-year-old are licensed. Their carry concealed license can carry. It allows on campuses, other places like that. And then the don't tread on me actually was the one, it was overridden. And that's something, the pride that they wanted to see. Dynamics. So COVID changed everything, how we came into the building, whether we would be shut down. We weren't sure going into the session whether or not it would make a difference. With COVID, would they be able to complete a session? And I'm proud to say they actually made it through the entire year, this legislative session, without having a shutdown regarding to COVID. They had a shutdown due to weather, and they had a shutdown due to the rolling power outages, and to the presidential inauguration and concerns there. But other than that, they didn't shut down because of COVID. So really proud, particularly of Ron Reichman, because he had such a large group of House members. He had to finagle and figure out a way to keep them safe, but stay in session. We had the new Senate leadership that I talked about, definitely much more conservative than even before Susan Wagle, who was Senate president. We had a new lieutenant governor. He was currently serving in the administration as a Secretary of Commerce, but about in early to mid-February, we had an opening due to our treasurer leaving and going to serve in Congress. And so the governor got to appoint, and so she appointed her current lieutenant governor to serve as the treasurer. And so she needed a new lieutenant governor. She appointed David Tolan, who's the Commerce Secretary. A little controversial because a lot of Republicans see him as probably the likely one to run against. If Governor Kelly wasn't to run again in the election, he's kind of an heir apparent in the party, doing a pretty good job, pretty popular throughout the state, made a lot of great changes. So we also saw the first father-son duo in the legislature. We had Senator from Dodge City pass away. His replacement was Ron Reichman Sr. in the Senate, and then obviously the Speaker serving in the House. Several new committee chairs and members who came, that made things different than the committee. We weren't sure which way they would vote, how the leadership was going to run, but it went pretty smoothly. I think the committees were efficient this year. As I said, they got a lot passed. They took votes the very first week of session. In my career, I can honestly tell you, I don't remember a significant vote being taken the very first week, but the legislators wanted to run the constitutional amendment dealing with the life issue. They got that out of the way quickly, and then were able to move on to some other things. Lots of initial angst and controversy between the Kelly administration and all the COVID protocols. Think about everything we went through in the fall with the emergency orders, churches being shut down, just a real tension that was there between the governor and some of the Republican leadership. But really, I felt like there was dialogue going on during the session, or we wouldn't have gotten so much accomplished. As I said, they did the work of 2 sessions in one. And an pre-election year is always different because you see people starting to line up. Are they going to run for higher office? Are they going to endorse certain candidates? What type of issues are they going to take that could be used against them in the campaign? And so we started to see that this year, and started to see people positioning themselves to run for those elections in the fall of 2022. I think the biggest success out of the COVID with the legislature is that everything is virtual now. We saw incredible participation because people had an option. While the State House was still closed, we didn't have the vaccines in place yet. We saw a lot of people participate virtually. The legislature was now, every committee could be online. You could not only listen to it the old school way, but you could also watch it through YouTube. They've created their own YouTube channel. Floor votes no longer was there a push button, but they did everything electronically because a lot of the legislators had to be moved. They had 6 feet apart, so they couldn't sit in every seat when they initially started. They were up in the galleries. Some were voting, would stay in their offices, but they'd have to come to the floor to vote. And so there had to be a space for them to do that, but be socially distanced. As I said, the legislative YouTube channel, everything is recorded. You can go back and watch sessions. So from a lobbyist, I really felt that pressure that I really couldn't miss a committee anymore because I could go back and watch it. So I think I spent a lot more time doing that, but I also gained a greater perspective because of it. And then that option to testify in person or virtually, I think going forward will just increase that ability for engagement. And I think most people are comfortable now with video conferencing. We've all done more Zooms than we care to do, but I think it's going to help with our legislative process and participation. And initially, we weren't really allowed to come into the State House, but by February, I was there every day. I didn't stay around unless I had to testify. Wasn't a lot of room to sit in the committees. So it really changed our interaction with lawmakers this year. There's a lot of new ones that I never really got a chance to meet because they didn't serve on my committees that I was in. We didn't have a lot of social events and evenings. Leadership really didn't want us taking people out until all the legislators were vaccinated. And so it really stymied building some of those relationships with the newbies, but looking forward to doing that through 2022 now that everybody's been vaccinated, who wanted to be. There are some lawmakers who chose not to, but anybody who wanted to had the opportunity, and they were taken care of pretty quickly. And by March, most of them had their initial shot. And by the time they came back for veto in May, they had all been vaccinated who wanted to. This is just, I think it's important for you to see what's the website. This is, again, it is improved because of our virtual world, but you can really access anything on this homepage. It's www.ksledge.org. And you can find the YouTube channel on here. You can listen to the committees. You can look up bills. You can track legislation. You can look at prior legislative sessions and what they did. So you'll get this in the handout when you have it, but it's a go-to. I find my calendars there every day. It tells me where I'm going to go. I watch committees from here. So it's a useful tool. And then this is what the YouTube channel page looks like. And then again, that it's all recorded. You watch it, you get to keep it and go back and watch them whenever you need to. From an HR perspective, we welcomed a new KDOL Secretary, Secretary Amber Schultz. She was the fourth agency leader in the time within 9 months. So lots of controversy going on. Delia Garcia started out as the secretary under the administration. She ran into some hiccups when the UI checks were being paid, that her agency actually issued the money to the bank accounts and then realized that they overpaid people. And so they took the money out, caused a major hiccup, one of many in our UI debacle in the state. But because of that, she was asked to leave. We had a couple different interims who came to serve, and then Amber is now the official. She's had her confirmation. She's got a technology background, which is something they need at DOL right now. And I find her very pleasant to work with. She's worked for the city of Lawrence and Topeka with information technology background. Very accessible and really willing, I think, to get her sleeves up and move forward. So looking forward to working with her. Most of the state agencies officials did not come to the legislature at all until the veto session. So they stayed out of the building. That was part of what the governor ordered them to do. She didn't want them over there. I will tell you that the Secretary of Commerce, his lobbyist, was there every day. So I think it was probably more of a comfort level of what people wanted to do, and virtual was easy. So we really didn't have a lot of interaction with state agencies until the veto session. So what were the top issues? These are the things we dealt with from a business perspective. Revenue is always at the top. What are things looking like? What I can tell you is we are trending well. We are above, obviously, where we were last year. We don't know how much of this is from stimulus and those types of things, or how much our economy is just really rebounding. But if you look in April, we were up 91 million, and in May, our revenue was up $1 billion over what they estimated. So we are definitely on a good path forward if we can keep this momentum. I think everybody's kind of waiting for that recession to hit. When it will be, we don't know. But right now, Kansas is meeting its expectations and beyond. I thought this was important for you just to see how much money so far has come to Kansas. We've got another $1.5 billion at least that we're expecting. But we've gotten about $24 billion into Kansas, because that's 20, if you see this, that's reported in millions. This shows how it's been broken down. Obviously, small business support has been huge. Our unemployment money that's been coming in has been a big piece. Healthcare is a big piece. It's broken down by total and then by per capita. So, again, per capita, we've seen about almost $8,300 per person is what Kansas has seen. And again, we are expecting more money to come in because the second half of the most recent stimulus package will be paid out in 2022. Oops, hold on here. It's not wanting to go. There we go. Big issue that we had to deal with was to clean up our Kansas Emergency Management Act. That is obviously how we handle and work through emergencies. What we currently had on the books was not set for a pandemic of our nature in our current time. So Senate Bill 40 was the start to where do we go going forward? Obviously, we had to deal with the current pandemic, but we had to move forward. This legislature felt like they wanted less power at the state level and wanted more power at the local level. So they drafted our new emergency management really focused at that. These powers took place as of March 31st of 2021. They also wanted to make sure that the local health officials had to run through their county, not be able to have their own ability to make policy. They felt like that local health official, they are an appointed position, they're not elected position, so that they wanted to make sure that we didn't have local health officials making decisions that impacted the state, but that the county had to sign off on what those decisions were. They also made sure that the legislature had some more influence over the administration so that it wasn't just the governor and the executive branch making all the decisions, but that their leadership had an opportunity to be able to weigh in on that. We were expecting the leadership to meet today to talk about the orders. The governor has asked for the extended order to go through July 15th. Legislative leadership was not willing to let her do that. So all emergency orders will end effective tonight at midnight. And we will no longer have any emergency orders in place due to the COVID pandemic in Kansas. The governor was really only asking for 2 programs to continue. They had to do with vaccine and distributions, but again, legislative leadership feels like we are on a great path and that those aren't necessary and that we can meet those needs and demands without the emergency orders being in place. From an HR perspective, I think what's most important in this order is no longer is that waiting week waived. We now have to have a waiting week in place that you don't get benefits the first week. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but just remember that's a key piece to what I think has caused a lot of the hiccups in our unemployment insurance system, because there was not that week for verification. And so we saw a lot of claims paid out that first week before they caught that they were fraudulent. Business liability and healthcare, again, this is extending what they did in 2020 and during the veto session to provide that coverage for businesses who at no fault of their own, somebody may try to sue them, but they followed all the protocols. This provides those protections. It carries them through to March 31st of 2022. So as long as you're following standards and recommendations, you won't be subject to liability. Other COVID-related bills, you can see the ones that I've mentioned have been vetoed. There was a nursing home liability protection that did pass. They were left out of the first bill for protection. In this second round, they do have some protection from liability. And then income property tax for businesses, 273 on here was vetoed. That would have given direct relief to current pandemic. The governor didn't like it. She felt like it was put together too fast and that there was enough money already available. And she thought it was going to be a very difficult process for businesses to provide for additional relief due to the forced shutdown. But she did not veto House Bill 2313, which is a prospective piece that if we were to ever have another emergency shutdown where businesses are forced to be shut due to an emergency order, that they could seek property tax relief. It's a formula that they go through with, and they would receive it from a state portion as well as a local county portion. It really depends on how the orders are written and who's ordering the shutdown, but that is only prospective. It would not deal with any of the current pandemic. There are a couple issues that are carried over for next year. We'll see if they spark. One has to do with vaccinations and whether or not employers can mandate that vaccinations have to occur. Right now, it is the will of the employer if they want to require that. There's a case moving through the federal system, a group of employees out of Texas who work for a healthcare system. They felt like it was infringing on their religious liberties to be required to have the vaccine. They didn't trust it. They didn't think it was fair. Federal court has ruled in favor of the employer so far. We'll see if it makes its way to the Supreme Court or not. And then tax issues. I talked about tax bill, Senate Bill 50. Some of the provisions impacting the HR world would be any income that you may have received because you got unemployment benefits. in traditional years, that's subject to income tax, but we followed what the feds did, and we have forgiven that there will be no tax on that unemployment insurance, as well as anything, if you had any identity fraud. So many of you may have been like my husband, where a claim was filed in your name. You never received the benefit. It went to somebody somewhere else, but you then got a 1099 saying that the claim had been paid. You won't be responsible for any tax on that. It also allows for better deductions for employers. Employees, you can itemize now. Some of that was taken away under the Brownback's tax cuts. Part of Senate Bill 50, a big piece of it was to bring some of those deductions back for individuals so that they can help with their tax liabilities. You don't have to report use tax anymore because we have passed internet sales tax. So no longer are you having to report that on your taxes. It modeled the federal corporate tax returns, the dates they need to be filed. It increased the standard deductions for individuals and for married couples. And then the rest of it is really more detailed, very important to the business community, but having to do with global income, those types of things. Senate Bill 47, for you in the HR world, it does allow an option for you as an employer to determine what withholding tax you file. Think about it. We're on the Missouri-Kansas border. Your company may be located in Missouri, but your individual worked from home in Kansas. Traditionally, you would have to do the withholding from Kansas, but because of this COVID world we've been living in and the forced, they have given an exception for now. This is the second year in a row that your withholding can follow your traditional state. So where you're headquartered, you can withhold from the Missouri, not have to do the Kansas where your employee has been residing most of the year. Okay, so let's get into a little more specific HR. And, the biggest issue is obviously the state of UI chaos that we experienced in our state. Lots of things went on. We had record low unemployment before we went into COVID. So think about February and March, we had jobs looking for people. And then all of a sudden by April, we had record unemployment. We had, obviously people were forced to be at home. COVID required shutdowns, layoffs. And so, the department's demand went from zil to, way over what they could handle. They were very understaffed. They were working with an antiquated information system that the feds were passing all these extra benefits that they had to try to program into this antiquated system, which caused a lot of the heartache. The department was not in compliance with the recommendations of what we should do to protect identity, to protect information. There were lots of recommendations that came down from the feds. We waited until January to implement those. We've never gotten a clear reason why they waited, other than they were afraid the system would shut down and they'd even have more people not getting their benefits. But in the end, they cost potentially up to $600 million, could be higher than that, of benefits that were paid out fraudulently. We also had untraditional fraud. We saw at the beginning, again, it was like drinking water from a fire hose for them. So the motto was, when in doubt, pay out. We don't care whether this person was entitled or not. We need to get benefits out to them. And so even though employers were reporting, look, this person quit at their own volition, we did not lay them off. They quit because they wanted to stay home, or they had other reasons that they needed to, but we did not lay them off. And so, but they were still paying those claims. And so we saw a lot of that until about late summer. And then that's when we really started seeing the untraditional fraud of identity theft. And it just kept snowballing until we got to January, when finally the department put in that two-tiered identity theft. And that's when things, it literally almost stopped that untraditional fraud. There were lots of things that were going on. Again, at the federal level, I talked about, never before have self-employed individuals been allowed to get benefits. Now, they weren't entitled to state benefits, but they had to be denied state benefits so that they could then get their federal benefits. So even though they weren't getting the state benefits, they were putting a demand in our system because they had to be vetted and had to be determined unqualified at the state for benefits and kick into the federal program. All of that, again, on a skeleton staff, where they really couldn't be together to work. So they're all working remotely. It was just really the perfect storm for them. As I mentioned, that waiting week was waived by the federal government. It was required if we were going to receive these federal UI benefits, we had to waive that waiting week. So there was no ability for the department to really look at any of these people if they were legitimate claimants or not. And again, drinking water through the fire hose, it just kept snowballing for them. So while they may have stopped it after the first or second week, they still paid out 1 or 2 weeks of benefits to some fraudulent person, a lot of them in countries outside of the US. And then really, they had poor customer service. The bottom line was they hired a company that wasn't doing a great job helping answer the phones. People literally would wait and be ringing phones 18 hours a day. Lawmakers started getting phone calls. It really blew up as a nightmare. And I think we'll learn a lot looking back about what they need to do and how to fix it. And they've put a committee in place to do that. But it really was a nightmare for not only those employees who needed their benefits, but the employers on the other side. And again, for legislators, the department. Just a lot of chaos that made the situation that much worse. So 2416, some of the highlights of this bill, that is the unemployment insurance reform bill, one of the biggest pieces of legislation I've worked on and one of the most important. It created a modernization committee that's charged. They actually had their first meeting yesterday. They're going to look at what we want in a system that works not only for employees, but employers and the regulators. So it'll be a whole new system with bells and whistles. We have estimates anywhere from 18 months to 5 years for it to take to get in place. We won't know until they pick the vendor and what components they put in it. But this group is charged with not only putting that in place, but then also to look at the fraud and to try to get their arms around what's the dollar amount of fraud that occurred. They're going to look at the exams, the claims process, and kind of report how did it go during the COVID, what is the current process, and what do we need to do to make it change. And again, that's not just for the claimant, but also for the employer, because the employer is really, it's not an easy system on the back end. For any of you who do UI managing it, it's difficult. It's not user friendly on the employer side, even less so on the employer side than the employee side. Again, they're going to do this independent audit to try to figure out how much fraudulent claims did occur. The department has estimated about $250 million. The post-audit, who is a legislative post-audit branch, they've estimated it's north of $600 million. One of the clients I work with, Kansas SHRM HR, they are confident, based on the numbers they've run, it's at least over $500 million. So they're going to put all these components in it. The first report will be due March 15th, and then the final report will be due March. I actually think that should be July 31st of 2022. Sorry about that. So that there is that window of opportunity, and then our amount of money, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, but what we are going to get stimulus funds put into the trust fund to provide relief for employers. If we're north of $500 million, employers are not going to see a full compensation for it, but at least they're going to get a portion of it paid back through these COVID funds that are coming to the state. The secretary is now under requirement that she do a report to this modernization committee on the 15th of each month of the status of where things are at, how are claims being processed, how many people have still not received their benefits. And so I think that'll be important. And then this council is only supposed to be around for 3 years. I think if it works well and we see this partnership between legislators, the agency, and the business community and the employee community, we may see it around and be something that stays to help, but we're not sure. Jimmy, you got a question?
I do, and forgive me if you're going to cover this, but is the legislation, are they looking at anything besides UI when it comes to not being prepared? Because I imagine this might not be the only antiquated system in Kansas. Yeah. Just throwing that out there.
We've got quite a few antiquated systems, and infrastructure for, all of our systems it's on the list. And we, for lack of better words, people have said Kansas really got caught with our pants down in UI, and we saw how vulnerable we were to hackers. And we know that, data, mining and all those types of things are the new crimes. I mean, anything to do with technology. And so we've got to really look at fixing all of those systems. The good news is our Secretary of Administration, she has a strong background in that. In fact, she just got an international award for some projects that she's been working on. And so it is definitely something the Kelly administration is working on. We just haven't funded it and kept it up like we should. We're not alone. I mean, other states are in similar situations because the UI fraud occurred in every state. But we were one of the worst.
Yep, Natalie, Carol? Could I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
For those who still are waiting for benefits, I know of a couple, even though there have been improvements, what is the best thing for them to do?
You know, without selling out my lawmakers, my legislators, it is getting in contact with the legislator. You know, unfortunately, my primary contact at the department left as of last week. He had been there the longest. You know, I think he weathered a horrible storm and he couldn't get out of there fast enough. But it is, I think, working through hopefully the phone bank is getting better. You know, the last I heard, there were still about 2,000 claimants out there, maybe 2,500 who had not received their benefits yet. They are trying to work through it, but I'd have them contact their legislator because they're going to get them to Secretary Schultz, and hopefully she can kind of help sort out what's going on. I know a lot of people now are having problem with the identification process because now that it is in place, they've halted. The bill 2416 does allow individuals to go to any law enforcement agency in their community, and they can assist them with getting their identification clarified. So that came from Susan Estes out of Wichita. She came up with that idea. It was a way to alleviate that waiting process of trying to get somebody at DOL to help you. So you can take your papers into your local law enforcement agency and they can help you sort that out. That should help a little bit because I think that's been a hang up that has caused people some headaches is they can't get through that verification process.
Thank you.
So yeah, here is the makeup of this modernization committee. I just think it's important that you see it has makeup of legislators, it has makeup of people from the private sector, as well as Secretary Schultz. So I really do think it's a great group of people. They've got a lot to move forward on. They'll have their first full meeting next week on Thursday and Friday, where they're going to really start trying to get some answers about what happened and really starting to ask the questions they need to build this new system that we need to protect us from any additional things that, you know, are going to come down the pike and just have a more user-friendly system that meets the current technology needs. You can see Rob Olson and Sean Tarwater are both from Johnson County, and they are the chair and vice chair because they chair the Commerce Committee. So if you have anybody in your realm, you know, within Johnson County that needs help, I would recommend reaching out to those two because they have direct access to Secretary Schultz. So here's some things that they want in and about the new system. They want to make sure they're cross-checking Social Security numbers. People aren't filing in multi-states. People aren't filing who are in prison under, you know, false pretenses. They want to detect if it's filed with an IP address outside of the U.S. These are all these fraud integrity components that really should have been in place before this ever happened. Were definitely recommended in July of 2020 that the department just didn't go forward with and waited until January. So those are all things that I think we're going to require. The LCC has oversight on this. They did not want to let this go completely to the Kelly administration. So they have the ability to approve who the committee recommends. And then the final negotiation contract with the party who will put the new system in is going to occur between a 3-panel. It's made up of the information technology chair for the legislature. The governor's got an appointment on there. I think her department administration, and then the Department of Labor has somebody who serves on there. So that's to make sure, you know, there is no favoritism going on and those types of things. And they really vet the vendor that's coming. I think the other piece is too, this by statute requires that state agencies share information with state agencies. I know that seems silly to you in today's world, but there's a lot of times when IRS or the Department of Revenue or Children's Services can't share information with the Department of Labor. And so this is going to mandate that they have MOUs that where the information is important that they need to be sharing, that they're able to do that. It's going to help with jobs, it'll help with child support, all of those types of things. So that was, I think, a piece that's maybe been underestimated in all of this discussion, but I think they'll bring a lot more efficiency for our state. My reemployment plan, this is one I'm super excited about. This was something that actually Governor Collier had implemented. Again, we had really low unemployment. We felt like anybody who was still in unemployment just needed assistance. They either needed to get retrained, they needed help putting resumes together, they needed some prompting to just get out there and look for a job. Well, Governor Kelly actually implemented this before the legislature passed it in statute again because they felt like it was an effective program. But it is in the statute books effective June 1st. So anybody who is on unemployment for more than 3 weeks, they have to be going in and getting assistance from the Department of Commerce. And if they do not report to Commerce and don't participate, I think they have to do 25 hours of participation with the Department of Commerce, they can be subject to losing their benefits. And so that's going to help get people back to work. There's been a lot of publicity, a lot of discussion. We engaged for the HR community with the governor about ending the federal benefits because there is a lot of feeling that people just aren't incentivized to get out there and be looking for a job. I don't know that the Governor Kelly is going to end our participation in the federal benefits. We're really running out of time for it to matter anyway, because they end September 5th. But this program, I think if the department really does what they're supposed to, will get people forced to look for jobs or they're going to lose their benefits. If they lose their state benefits, they'll lose their federal benefits. So if you need more information on that, feel free to let me know. Jimmy, go ahead.
So I know in the past you ran into some things where if you were disqualified in the past, it would disqualify you in the future with new rules. With something like this, is it built into where maybe you were participating, but then you got a job, so you stopped the 25 hours, but you lost it again, right? Something else comes up in the next few months, heaven forbid. Is there protection?
You would just restart. You'd have to go back in. You'd get 3 weeks to be on, and then you'd have to get back into the program. Yeah. Okay. And that's it's great. Commerce should be working with Department of Labor like that and helping people who have lost their job. Remember, of no fault of their own, they may need a hand assistance. And so it's great that they married these two agencies to effectively work. And I think it's going to be on the employer community. We'll talk about the next one that I think is another important piece to what's going on, and that's job refusals. If you offer a job and an individual just says, look, I'm not interested, I don't want it, you can report that information to the Department of Labor, and they now have to, within 10 days, investigate why that person didn't take the job. Now, there are reasons that are, may not have been suitable for them. The pay may not have been comparable to what they were making before. There are ways to get out of it. But if they just simply don't want to do it because they say they're making more money on unemployment than they would be taking the job, that's not going to cut muster. So, and I think the 10 days is, going to be hard for DOL to measure, but I can tell you lawmakers are going to be really on them to make sure they implement this program. So this document kind of walks through employers how to make those filings and how to do those reportings. And so Shannon, I'll make that available. There's a link actually on a website where you can access that. Kansas SHRM worked with the department to put it together to make sure we had everything worded correctly. So, all right, fraud, it's a crime. People who defrauded, whether it was traditional type of fraud where they just quit their jobs and they filed even though they weren't entitled, and they were paid, it's an issue. But what is bigger for us in the employer community right now is how do we recoup any of that 500 plus million that's been lost? Even if it's $250 million, it's still a big hit on our trust fund. And so because of that, we did pass these strict provisions in there that no employer is going to be held, they will be held harmless for any fraud that is proven on their account, that it will actually be the employee who will have to do the proof that they were not, that they were entitled to those benefits. If it's an identity theft type of situation, in reimbursing employers. So think about your nonprofit world, government agencies who pay as you go. They don't pay into the insurance trust fund, private sector side does, but they pay as they go. They had to, as of June 1st and December 1st, they got their quarterly statements and they had to pay, and they didn't have an opportunity to reject any of those fraudulent payments. So those are going to be refunded or credited to their accounts. And so lawmakers just really wanted to make employers whole for the fraud that they incurred. They also, again, how it's split up for up to $500 million of COVID relief. 250 will go in 2021 into the trust fund, and then up to another 250 will go in 2022, but it's all going to be based on what that independent audit shows. So if that independent audit shows that only 400 million was fraudulently paid, then only 150 will be paid. If it shows that 600 million was paid out, then we'll get the full 250 that second year, but employers will have to find a way to reimburse the fund that additional 100 million that was lost. Because all of that penalty goes back on employers to make sure our trust fund is solvent. Additional reforms, security review board, because of all these fraudulent claims out there, whether it's traditional or non-traditional, they knew that they're probably the review board. Any claims that are going to be filed would need to be reviewed. So they've doubled that capacity. So if anybody in the HR community is interested in serving on that, it does have a salary, a payment that goes with it. You spend at least 1 to 2 days a month in hearing appeals. They're done virtually now. I don't know if they'll have you come in person or if they'll continue to be virtual, but if you're interested in that, let Shannon know and I can get you some more information about that. Solvency credit charge. So that goes back to if our trust fund is found to not be solvent by the feds, meaning we don't have enough money in there based on actuary, then employers have to start paying that back. And so they'll put a certain credit on each employer's account. It used to be that it was across the board, a flat rate of 2%. So whether Jimmy used the unemployment trust fund all the time and Shannon didn't use it, they were going to pay the same rate. Now that rate is going to be more reflective of what your usage is. So think about your car insurance. Jimmy gets 10 speeding tickets and Shannon gets none. His insurance is going to cost more because he got 10 speeding tickets than Shannon's. And so the payback is going to be comparable to what that. But again, remember, if you can prove that it was fraud claims, those fraudulent claims shouldn't go against your experience rating in the trust fund. So that's going to be important. And employers in the community won't know what those fraudulent claims are because you won't see your statements until November of this year. So all the activity that occurred through July of this year, which is when a lot of that fraud, you won't start to see those statements for a whole full year until next year. So we're going to have to just educate employers, stay on top of watching your statements. If you don't understand how to read it, make sure you find out, ask somebody to help you walk through it, whether it's at the department or if you use a third-party administrator to help. Just make sure you're watching that and that those claims that you're being charged for are legitimate, because if not, it's going to spike your rates up and you're going to be paying a lot more unemployment insurance down the road. Shared work is where you lay off somebody for a certain number of hours, but they still come back. So they may work 75% of their normal shift. That 25% they can actually get paid for under a shared work program and get unemployment for that portion. We found it to be a very important program during this pandemic where companies could lay people off to help adjust for payroll and those types of things for a certain portion, but then have their account charged for the unemployment side of it. And so it kept people working during this pandemic without just fully laying them off. And so usually you were only allowed to do that every 3 years, but it's now going to be allowed annually. But you just have to make sure that your reserve ratio, which is how much money is in your account balance, is improving each year. And think about, we have positively balanced employers, people like Shannon who never use their account. And then we have negatively balanced employers like Jimmy who use it all the time. That negatively balanced employer, their reserve ratio can still be negative, meaning they've taken out more than they've paid in. But that reserve ratio will continue to have to improve and get better, because we just don't want people to use it and take more out of the fund than they pay in, because that only bumps up Shannon's rates from year to year. And then Jimmy, you talked about the disqualification. We did make the penalties tougher. So if you are found to have received benefits fraudulently, you have to pay those back. And then you are not allowed to get benefits for a year. And then if you have a second offense in your lifetime, again, you have to pay back whatever you defrauded, and then you are banned for 5 years. And so it's some of the strictest in the country now. And we used to be a 5-year ban, which was also strict. But the piece that I think is important about this is often people were banned for 5 years, but they never paid the trust fund back. And isn't the restitution, that's the more important piece, that they put the money back in they took out. And so I think that's an important piece going forward, helping keep our fund where it needs to be. So any other questions on unemployment insurance? That was a lot. It really took up most of my session. I know we're getting close on time, so I'll kind of move through this, the rest of it. And again, we can follow up later if any questions you might have. So there is a real sense across the country, but particularly in Kansas by some employer groups, that we need to make it easier to get a job in Kansas. And so licensures is one of those areas they've worked on in the last couple of years. This is a pretty big bill that now we've loosened our licensures. So if you're a military spouse or you're somebody coming from outside of the state and you are licensed in Missouri and you want to come work in Kansas, As long as your licensure requirements are comparable to Kansas, you don't have to wait. You should be able to get your license within a certain number of weeks and be able to get to work. And so the thought is we can attract more talent because we're going to make it easier for them to get here. It really all came out of the military spouses who, obviously move about every year or two. And so spouses would sometimes have a hard time moving from one state to the next. This came out of the Army base in Manhattan saying, look, we need this in Kansas. We have a lot of spouses having a hard time getting a job. And, it was pretty controversial. There's a lot of, industries that are licensed. Think about architects. They were one of the biggest outspoken. CPAs were also outspoken about this and didn't like it. They wanted to make sure they could control their own credentialing in our state. But I think there's enough preservation in there that we need to try it and see if it helps us grow our workforce, because we have a shortage of workers and we need to let as many people in as we can. An issue that we're seeing is a lot of, again, these second chance workers, those who have had criminal history, looking at making licensure easier for them. There's been a couple bills that have passed throughout the years. And so I think we'll talk about this some more next year, particularly with our workforce shortage and needing to attract talent. We're seeing a lot of people really loosen up their requirements before they hire employees in regards to background checks. Equality and discrimination, always a topic. We've had a lot of discussions around marriage in Kansas, constitutional amendments, those types of things. The only thing we really dealt with this year had to do with Fairness in Women's Sports Act, having to do with transgender athletes. Pretty controversial. It's kind of a model bill that's being passed throughout the state, particularly in Republican states. It was passed by Kansas, but the governor vetoed it, and there was not, the Senate was able to override the veto, but the House did not have the votes to override it, and so her veto stand. And I expect the issue will be back in the 2022 session, and that it's going to be tied to the Athletes Likeness Bill, which is also another initiative going throughout where athletes can get compensation for their likeness. So if you're a KU basketball player, you're allowed to get scholarships, you're allowed to get some extra incentives because the university is benefiting from your playing there, your likeness. And so I think these two bills will be married together, and it'll be interesting to see how that impacts NCAA procedures, those types of things. NCAA has spoken out against this bill, but we've also seen that they've not pulled events in states that have passed it. I can't remember, I want to say maybe 13 states have passed it already. That might have changed by the final when all the sessions wrapped up. But again, I think we'll see these issues to percolate and where they are really more of a social religious type of component. It impacts the business community. It impacts hiring in the state. And so we continue to watch them from a business HR perspective. Wage and policy, all of these bills were introduced. None of them went anywhere, but I think the wage discussion is going to continue to be something that we'll talk about. When we had a roundtable with the governor about workforce and ending the benefits, wages continue to come up, and I think we've seen them. I don't think you see very many people offering minimum wage for jobs. You go into a fast food restaurant, they're paying $12 an hour. I think somebody told me 14 they saw the other day at a Chipotle. So we're seeing those wage increases because they just don't have the bodies, and so they're willing to pay more to get them. But I think we're going to see a package of probably come from the business community in conjunction with the administration to try to figure out how we can get people back to work, and removing any of those barriers that might exist, like childcare. There's others that are out there. Education, K through 12 was fully funded. That's always an issue that's important for us in the HR because it's our pipeline and our talent. They were able to marry that with a tax credit that they expanded for low-income students. Sometimes this gets caught up in that school choice argument. Some of those who are on the more moderate side don't like that because they think it's a voucher-like type of program. But with our conservative legislature, they negotiated with the governor, and she did go ahead and sign the bill. It expands free ACT, so work keys and ACT will be available to all students, not just those in the public schools, but also private and homeschool kids can now get a once a year free ACT test, which is important. And then they tied in the foster care report card to this. So kids who are in the foster care system, there has to be an annual report card that tracks their education, because often those kids are moving from schools to schools. And so this is a way to kind of help keep them in line in education. And then the Promise Scholarship Act, that bill was vetoed last year by the governor. It came back, it was renegotiated. It looks at the top 10 high industry need areas typically in the tech world, and it will allow a scholarship for low-income Kansans who graduate from a Kansas high school or from a military spouse. If you were a military kid, you can also qualify for it. It allows you, if you complete one of those top 10 programs, to have your loans forgiven as long as you work in Kansas for 2 years after you have been educated. So I think it's a great program. Hopefully it'll help our talent pipeline, again, that we're working to get workers and enough to meet the demands. Two bills that did not pass but could be back next year is Senate Bill 96, which is in-state tuition for unlawful immigrants. Think about all of your DACA kids who may be living in Kansas and in college. They do get an in-state tuition, but there are conservative lawmakers who would like to see that repealed. And then the student liability, this is a pretty big one, having to do with internships. There are some businesses who would like to participate in internship programs, job shadowing, but they don't because they're concerned about the liability for students under 18. And so the idea behind the bill is to allow to treat those job shadowing and internships very much like your after-school activities, your extracurricular activities, sports. And so it's really an insurance requirement, and that it would be carried through the school district. Some districts already offer it and allow it, but it's not across the board in Kansas. And so this has been one Sean Tarwater's worked on for a long time because he thinks, again, it's going to help that pipeline, help kids in high school get more job shadowing. So hopefully they're more successful once they get out into a higher ed program and do a better job. Immigration, the only thing we saw was the E-Verify in the budget bill that required all state contractors who do business with the state would have to E-Verify all their employees. That was vetoed by the governor as a line item veto. But other than that, we saw some discussion about E-Verify, but didn't really see it. Maybe next year, there's been some discussions, even amongst Republican legislators with this workforce shortage, that maybe we need to look at some of these individuals who are coming to the border and looking at kind of a foster program for them and while they're waiting to get citizenship, and look at a way to increase our talent and pipeline. So we'll watch over the fall kind of what happens and develops at the border and what it looks like. But we could see some strong immigration discussions happen in Kansas because of our shortage of workers. And it's not just, out west in the packing houses and in the fields, but it's in our hospitals. It's in, it's everywhere that we could use this immigration population. And so, we'll kind of see, I think a lot of it will be driven by nationally what they do, but there are some things that states could do to maybe help alleviate some of the issues. Workers' compensation, all these bills were introduced, but none of them were addressed. We didn't even have any conversation about work comp. Healthcare and Medicaid expansion, really the major bill was Senate Bill 199 I talked about that would extend short-term policies. Again, it's a one-year policy. People buy usually gap insurance while they're in between jobs. It doesn't cover a lot. It covers some things, but really it's not your comprehensive. If you get cancer, you really have to have a cancer policy to cover it. Right now in Kansas, you can renew it for 2 years. They wanted to renew it for 3 years. Beverly Gossage, who was our new senator in Olathe, replaced Julia Lynn. This was her bill. She's very passionate about it, worked hard to get it passed, but the governor vetoed it based on advocate groups who oppose it because they think it has too many shortfalls in it and that really we should be moving people to the exchange and getting them into the market as opposed to doing these short-term policies that they often find themselves lost in the gap. The governor did introduce a bill that would tie Medicaid expansion with paying for it with legalizing medical marijuana in Kansas. It didn't get anywhere, but medical marijuana did. And so I will note they took a vote on expansion in the Senate, and that was the lowest vote count we have ever had in the Kansas Senate for expansion. Only 12 legislators supported it, which means it was probably all the Democrats and one Republican voted for it. So I don't know what that means for discussions in expansion, which is still a big issue for our hospital partners, healthcare worker community. But right now, our Kansas legislature's makeup just really is not supportive of expanding Medicaid. Did some work on mental health. The modernization report is really what do we need to do in Kansas to bring our mental health support systems up to par. So it'll kind of be a guidebook for legislators and communities as we move forward. And then Senate Bill 2208 is going to help start community mental health systems to be able to get caught up and provide better services. They're going to get a credential that they have to go through and meet certain requirements. So it's a start for these reforms and to give them better equipped people in their communities to work across to provide these mental health services we know that have really become even more critical since COVID hit. And then we are part of the 988 funding, which is the suicide prevention line. This is a national bill that was passed, but states have to fund it at the local level. And so it was in the budget, it did pass. Not going to affect any of us, but if you have a 620 area code or a 785, you can still dial a 7-digit phone number and get a hold of people. They will have to switch over and do a 10-digit phone call like we do in 913. We have to dial all 10 digits to get a hold of people now. And then medical marijuana. This is, again, I didn't know if it would move this year, but at the end of the session, the Speaker of the House is pretty supportive of this and wanting to see something done. I think the pressure from our surrounding states passing something has really made this issue come to fruition. So it did pass the House. They negotiated a bill and got it through 79-42. So it didn't have that super majority vote of 2/3, but it had a pretty strong support. So I think they'll pick that up with the Senate next year and look to negotiate, because I should have mentioned this in the beginning, but all bills that were introduced this year, unless they were specifically killed by a vote, will resurrect next year and be available for work for them to continue, because we're on a 2-year bill cycle in Kansas.
Natalie,
Yeah, go ahead, Jimmy.
quick question on, I know we're running out of time. The mental health telemedicine was continued, right, in Kansas?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Just from HR, from a perspective of benefits and those kinds of
Yes. Yes, good question. And it's in there somewhere, and I'm sorry I skipped over it, but telehealth was all part of the reforms that we would continue that and allow that access, as well as licensure for those who are outside of the state. They can practice telehealth in the state that way as well, which will help with our capacity. Good question. Interim issues, they're going to continue the work. I think we're going to watch the federal dollars that are coming. How is that money being spent? What does our economic rebound look like? What are communities going to need as we move forward to continue coming out of this COVID crisis? Workforce issues I have talked a lot about, and I mean, it's going to be a focus. It needs to be a focus, particularly in the HR community, because I know many of you are looking to hire folks and get them in and get your business back at full capacity. And so these are just some things that we are currently working on. We're fearful if we don't start tackling these, we're going to have other states that are ahead of us, and it'll be just that much more difficult to get our businesses fully opened and back to providing what service was prior. We're seeing it in our supply chains. I mean, it isn't just the restaurants and the workers, but the restaurants can't get chicken wings because there's not enough people in the packing houses for the chicken wings to be processed. And so, those are real issues that, it's not just a Kansas centric, it's a national issue, but we need to do our part in the state to see what we can do to help. And then again, I talked about childcare is an issue. It was an issue before, it's an issue now. Transportation, there's some creative programs out there, but we need to see what we can do to help people who need to get to their jobs and be able to, have a steady way to get to work. Education and retraining, I think we've got a lot of opportunity to do that as we move forward. And then maybe it's a time for us to really look at alternative workers. Again, we talked about those second chance workers, the disability community, gig workers. Just really rethink what work looks like. I think, we have a lot of people who will continue to work from home. It's just through COVID, they found it to be more efficient. And so all of those are going to maybe require legislation as we go forward. And so we'll be watching that and monitoring it in the HR world and propose it when it's necessary. For 2022, these are just some of the issues we know are going to come back based on discussions. Sports gaming is not one that's HR, but it's one that it's happening in all the states around us, like medical marijuana. And so if Kansas doesn't get off the dime quickly, then we'll probably lose some of that competitiveness. And I talked about the NCAA likeness and then that liability for students. Hopefully we'll get that done next year, because that'll be the 4th year that we've talked about that issue. Remiss if I didn't talk about elections. They're coming up statewide for 2022. We're also going to have redistricting based on the last census. We're going to need to redo all of our districts at the House and Senate level. So they'll be working on that and have to vote on it next year. That's always controversial, because remember, they're designing what their district that they're going to run in for re-election looks like. And so they want to make sure it's the most favorable count for them. Kansas did retain all 4 House seats, so that's big for us. We weren't sure if we were going to lose a House seat based on a population declining out west, but we were able to keep all 4. And we're going to expect complete new leadership in the House after the 22 elections. Speaker Reichman will not be coming back and running as speaker, that I've heard most likely. So we'll have a whole new slant. Probably the majority leader, Dan Hawkins, will step up from Wichita. But that's, Johnson County loses that leadership position, and all of the House, all of the Senate is all from Wichita in their leadership. So we need to look at recruiting some of our Northeast Kansas leaders to get up there and start serving. These are the announced gubernatorial for the Republican side. At this point, Governor Kelly is still running. There are some who speculate maybe after this pandemic she's done and doesn't want to, and so who would be the next heir apparent? But at this point, we still anticipate that she will seek re-election and will be likely running against one of these two, maybe a third candidate who throws their hat in. There's still some time to do that. Secretary, State Treasurer candidates, these are the three who have thrown their hat in. Again, remember I said Lynn Rogers, who was the lieutenant governor, was appointed by Governor Kelly to serve out the term. And so the two Republican candidates who have come forward and filed is Steve Johnson and Michael Austin. And then there's rumors that Karen Tyson, who is the Senate chair of tax, may also run, but she hasn't officially announced that yet, just State House rumor. And then these are potential Attorney General candidates. Chris Kobach has said he wants to run. Speaker Pro Tem has talked about running, and then Kelly Warren, who's from Leawood, has also run. I'm sorry, Blaine Finch is the Speaker Pro Tem. I should have said his name. All interesting candidates, come from different backgrounds. Chris obviously is a candidate we're all very well with. Blaine has done a fantastic job in the House, helping maneuver through these tough times. He is the go-to legal expert there. So he'd be a great candidate. And then Kelly Warren, she's only the second woman to serve as the judiciary chair and attorney in the Kansas Senate. And she's really been a quick up and comer. So I think we've got some good opportunities there, with Derek Schmidt leaving to run for governor to fill his shoes. I'm not sure on the Democrat side yet who we'll see come forth, but I'm pretty sure there's one candidate out of Wichita who's an attorney would be running. Again, Marley and I know I went over, I'm so sorry about that, Shannon, but please feel free to reach out to Marley and I if you have any questions. Love what we do. We talk fast. So we can get out all of our words and lots of information. I mean, if I could have covered everything that went on this session, we'd still be here and you'd probably all be asleep. So I'll stop now. If there are any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll share the presentation with Shannon, and happy to answer any follow-up questions via email. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I will get the presentation out to the group, and then we will likely we recorded this today and we'll likely put that on our YouTube channel as well. But yeah, definitely a ton of interesting information, even as somebody that doesn't deal with it on a day-to-day basis. It's amazing the number of changes that can take place. Thank you guys all for joining us. Again, I want to thank Jimmy Gaona with Edward Jones for being our sponsor for 2021. And we will see you all next month, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you.